and welcome to Sipz and Stories. My name is Elizabeth, and in today's video I will be discussing all of the books that I plan to read for Jane Austen July and that I recommend for each of the 7 challenges. Jane Austen July is hosted every year by Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from the Spinsters Library. I will link all the channels below along with the 7 challenges and the Goodreads reading groups if you would like to participate. I love this time of year. I love all things Jane Austen and the Regency era. And it's so fun after a hard day at work to lean back, grab your favorite beverage, and reread Pride and Prejudice, or grab a bowl of popcorn and watch one of the Jane Austen adaptations. So pick your favorite beverage of choice and join me as I discuss all things Jane Austen. Challenge number 1 is to read one of Jane Austen's 6 major novels, which include Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, or Persuasion. This year, the ladies have chosen Sense and Sensibility. Here is my edition of Sense and Sensibility that I made for my Etsy shop, Rebound Classics. I just love this one. It's got a lovely green binding and then beautiful pink end papers. And if you are looking for a nice edition of Sense and Sensibility, I highly recommend checking out my Etsy shop. I also have fun editions of Emma and Persuasion in the shop if you'd like to check them out below. Challenge number 2 is to read something else by Jane Austen that is not one of her 6 major novels. So you can read one of her unpublished works, or you can read some of her juvenilia. Her juvenilia has been published in 3 volumes. I own behind me some editions of the juvenilia that are more facsimile editions where you can see Jane Austen's writing and her script. If you'd like to see that, check out some of my other Jane Austen videos below. But I do highly recommend this edition of Love and Friendship and Other Writings, which is by Penguin Clothbound Classics. It includes all of the juvenilia in a single volume, and so it's just a nice, handy resource if you are interested in Jane Austen juvenilia. I haven't read the whole thing cover to cover. I've just kind of dipped in and out of this. I would like to read Love and Friendship once and for all. Again, I've just skimmed it in years past, but there is something unique and special about Jane Austen's juvenilia. She was a prolific writer even as a child. As young as 10 or 11, she had writing in notebooks and was writing stories. She was very fascinated, obviously, with romance, with relationships, and then you can also see her budding sense of humor in her juvenilia. So it's just a really excellent resource if you love Jane Austen and you want to see how her writing developed as an author. In addition to reading Sense and Sensibility, the ladies will also be reading Sandition during the second half of July. I don't think I'm going to participate in Sense and Sensibility, but I will be participating in Sandition. I've always been interested in Jane Austen's unpublished works like The Watsons, like Sanditon. I think I'm really interested in Sanditon lately because of the miniseries that has just come out, and there's already, I think, a 3rd season of the miniseries. So I would like to go back and read the unpublished, unfinished manuscript for Sanditon to compare, that first draft by Jane Austen with the modern adaptation with modern screenwriters and modern directors and actors. It sounds like it'll be a fun project. Challenge number 3 is to read a work of nonfiction that is about Jane Austen's life or the time period in which she lived. And Jane Austen did live in really fascinating times. I mean, here in the United States, we were going through a revolution. There were also revolutions in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars. So when you hear about Captain Wentworth and all these people, they were probably off fighting the Napoleonic Wars. But that being said, one of my favorite biographies about Jane Austen is definitely hands down Lucy Worsley's recent biography, Jane Austen at Home. I read this a couple years ago and I absolutely loved it. I also really just love Lucy Worsley herself. She also has a really fascinating biography of Agatha Christie, which I highly recommend. This one is really unique because she tells the story of Jane Austen's life through the homes that she lived in. So it starts with Steventon Rectory when Jane Austen was a young girl. Her father was a clergyman and he ran this boys' boarding school. She was always around like cousins and brothers and sisters and the pupils of her father. So obviously she had a very interactive childhood. Lucy Worsley also talks about Bath, the family's time in Bath, which shows up very prominently, obviously, in Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. Then she ends the book by talking about Chawton, which was the home that she shared with her sister Cassandra during the last half of her life. It also gets into like some of the places that Jane Austen liked to go on vacation, her time in London with her brother, who helped her publish Pride and Prejudice and Emma. And then it also discusses her time in Bath and Lyme Regis and Brighton, just some of the places that Jane Austen liked to visit that did show up in her novels. One reason that I like this book so much is that Lucy Worsley kind of dispels the myth of Jane Austen. She really was a real person with a wide social network of family and friends. I love how Lucy Worsley discusses all the female relationships in Jane Austen's life, including her sister Cassandra, of course, and some of her cousins and close female relatives. And one thing that Lucy Worsley dispels, one myth that she dispels, is that Jane Austen was just this dowdy, spinsterish girl that wrote these books in the comfort and seclusion of her living room. That couldn't be further from the truth. Jane Austen had a wide social network. She also had several romances throughout her life, most famously Tom Lefroy. Again, Lucy Worsley points out that Jane Austen had several opportunities to get married, but she chose not to, and history will have to decide why she chose not to. But Lucy Worsley points out that perhaps she chose not to because she knew as a wife and a mother that she would not have time to be independent and she would not have time for her writing. So just imagine what Jane Austen's life would have been had she gotten married and had children. I really doubt we would have had all the 6 major novels if she had gotten married, and so that's kind of what Lucy Worsley is saying in that biography. I love it and I highly recommend it. 2 other books that I highly recommend are Jane Was Here by Nicole Jacobson and Devynn Dayton, and Jane Austen's Bath by Katharine Reeve. Both books are just gorgeous coffee table books if you like all things Jane Austen and you also like to travel like I do. The first one, Jane Austen Was Here, is kind of a resource for all Janeites like myself that love to travel and love England especially. So it is about 3 best friends that traveled up and down England together, and they talk about all the Jane Austen-y things to do in London and Bath, all of these famous houses and museums throughout England that were used as sets in the Jane Austen movies. Most famously probably Chatsworth, which was the set of Pemberley and the Keira Knightley version of Pride and Prejudice. You can visit Chatsworth and you can tour the museum there and just really get into the touristy vibes of all things Jane Austen. She talks about the Jane Austen Festival, which I've been to in Bath. Lots of fun, and it's just a fun little coffee table book. I will show you some close-up shots because it has just adorable and fun and cute and quirky little illustrations throughout. Just one of my favorite Jane Austen inspired coffee table books. Jane Austen's Bath by Katharine Reeve is more of a book dedicated to all things Bath, and I did get it in Bath when I visited for the Jane Austen Festival a couple years ago. And there is this quirky little goofy museum, the Jane Austen Museum in Bath. It's just very funny, like all the docents dress up like Jane Austen, and then there's all these like mannequins, like really creepy little mannequins that are all dressed in Regency costume. But their gift store is like heaven for all Jane Austen fans. It has so much kitschy Jane Austen stuff. I loved it, but of course I couldn't take it all home with me, so I got this book, and it came in really useful when I was in Bath. It is some walking tours throughout Bath. I think 3 or 4 different walking tours and different stops and points of interest in Bath that you can visit, like the Royal Crescent, like the Avon River, like Bath, the famous Roman baths and the cathedral. And then it also has a list of resources in the back of some very famous tea shops and restaurants and hotels in Bath if you're visiting with family and friends. I love this. It came in very useful. It also, like peppered throughout, has a great deal of history about Jane Austen's life in Bath. So you learn a lot about her family and the time period that her and her family lived in Bath. And then it just has quotes from like Northanger Abbey and Persuasion peppered throughout. I love this book so much. I wish it was a part of a series. I wish there was like a Charles Dickens London or a Rudyard Kipling India. I wish that it was a series where there was travel books based on where authors lived. I think that would be a great idea for a book series. Okay, challenge number 4 is probably my favorite challenge, and that is to read books that are either based on Jane Austen's books or an adaptation of Jane Austen's books or retelling, or are set in the Regency era. Let's start with Jane Austen retellings. I would say that one of my all-time favorite Jane Austen retellings is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Harlow. I read that a couple of years ago and I absolutely loved it. It blew me away because not only is it just an excellent retelling of Pride and Prejudice through the perspective of Mary Bennet, and then it kind of goes off on this whole other tangent about Mary Bennet's life and her romance. But Janice Harlow is the only writer I have ever found that was able to mimic Jane Austen's writing style pretty well. I think even Jane Austen would have approved of this book. It's very literary, so it's not your average like rom-com slapstick kind of book. It's a very highbrow literary novel. Speaking of which, I would also really love to read Longbourn by Jo Baker this year. Again, this is supposed to be another very literary retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but from the perspective of a maid who works for the Bennet family at Longbourn. I'm fascinated by this. I think Downton Abbey fans like myself probably will love this. And being a maid or a servant, even in Victorian England or Edwardian England, seemed bad enough. So I cannot imagine what it was like to be a servant during the Regency era, right? So I'm really looking forward to this book this year for Jane Austen July. And if you're a Jane Austen fan with a sense of humor, I do love the recent Pride and Prejudice adaptation that came out last year, A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals. That book was so funny. And I highly recommend it too for like the fall or Halloween because it had a very like goofy Halloween autumn flavor to it. It's kind of a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. All the characters have different names, but it's a parody of Pride and Prejudice. It's a farce. You have to be in a certain mood for this book, but I thought the author did such a fantastic job and it just made me laugh outright. It's basically the story of this woman like Elizabeth Bennet and her and a man like Darcy are solving this murder mystery together. But it gets really kooky. It's set in Swampshire. The house is called Stabmore Manor. One of the characters is Edward Croaksworth. It just kind of has a goofy slapstick sense of humor. I loved it. Again, you have to be in a certain mood for this book. Not everyone will enjoy this. It's not everyone's cup of tea. But if you have a sense of humor, you'll probably really love it as much as I did. Also, it has a lot of Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice Easter eggs in it. The author is very clever about talking about certain instances and phrases and scenes from Pride and Prejudice that you will not understand unless you've read the books and the majority of Jane Austen's books. So I really appreciated that about A Most Agreeable Murder as well. All right, moving on to Regency adaptations or Regency romances. No discussion of this genre is complete without the person who practically invented it, and that is Georgette Hare. I really enjoy Georgette Hare. I've read several of her books so far, Venetia and Cotillion, and then I'm really excited to read The Grand Sophy next. Her books are very well written. Georgette Hare was a very prolific writer who wrote mostly during the 1950s and the 1960s. So again, she was this person that kind of invented the Regency romance. And her books are really good. They're very clever, they're very witty, but in a kind of a different tone to Jane Austen, more of like a Elizabeth Gaskell tone. I am currently reading Cranford, and I think the sense of humor in like Cranford and Elizabeth Gaskell is kind of very similar to Georgette Hare's sense of humor. A little more of like parody and farce, but not as crazy as A Most Agreeable Murder. I'm always like curious to see if like actors like Stephen Fry or Dame Judi Dench will do an adaptation of a Georgette Hare novel, because I could totally like see the casting with like certain British actors if they could adapt a Georgette Hare novel. It would be very, very interesting. I love her so much, and yeah, all of her books are worth it. So just kind of do some research. I'd say Cotillion, Frederica, Venetia, The Grand Sophy are probably some of her most famous ones. But yeah, if you like Jane Austen, you'll probably really enjoy Georgette Hare. Speaking of Georgette Hare, I really wanted to mention a new writer who has been writing recently, Sophie Irwin. And I kind of think of Sophie Irwin's books as like modern Georgette Hare. She's only come out with 2 books so far, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting and A Lady's Guide to Scandal, which I'm currently reading. And I love these books so much. She's really hit on a niche, and I really hope she continues to write more books set in the Regency era, because like Georgette Hare, she's very, very clever. These books are entertaining, but she's also a very witty and intelligent writer too. And so many of these books, these rom-com-y books, are not that good, to be honest. Even if you love Jane Austen, the writing can be a little poor on some of these types of books. Not the case with Sophie Irwin. Her writing is very clever, and she's also really entertaining as well. I have really been enjoying her books. She also features kind of like modern day perspective of Regency era, so she brings in a lot of discussion of issues that are relevant to modern readers, like LGBTQ themes, like more ethnicities, and I really, really enjoy her writing. I also recommend Sophie Irwin if you are like me and you are not necessarily a huge fan of Bridgerton. And I think there's this misconception that if you like Jane Austen, you will simultaneously love Bridgerton. For me, that is not the case. I appreciate Bridgerton. I understand what Shonda Rhimes was trying to do with Bridgerton, but I don't really love the storyline and the plots of Bridgerton. Comparing Bridgerton to Jane Austen is like comparing mac and cheese to a gourmet meal. It's not the same. It's a different genre. Julia Quinn is writing more romance, bodice ripping kind of novels, and just, not something that if you're like me, a fan of the classics, you will necessarily enjoy. That being said, I do think that Sophie Irwin is kind of bridging that gap between it's not as salacious as Julia Quinn and Bridgerton, but it's not as like highbrow as Jane Austen. It's kind of like somewhere in the middle, which is why I really enjoy Sophie Irwin. Another new series, which I just discovered at the library and I'm already really enjoying, is the Miss Austen Investigates series. And the first book in the series, The Hapless Milliner, just came out this year, and it's by Jessica Bull. And I don't know why no one has thought of this before, because it is a genius plot idea. Basically, it is a series where Jane Austen is the detective, and I just love it so, so much. I think if you're like me and you're a fan of all things Jane Austen and then all things Agatha Christie, I think you will really like this new series, Miss Austen Investigates. The writing style is a little off-putting at first. Her tense structure, her like third-person tense structure is a little weird. But once you get into it, these books are so much fun. And it talks about Jane Austen's life at the Steventon Rectory when she was in her early 20s. It talks about like her budding romance with Tom Lefroy and her relationship with Cassandra. One of the main reasons I enjoyed this book is it also talks about her brother George. Not a lot of people know this, but Jane Austen did have a brother who was mentally challenged, who had perhaps like Asperger's or ADD or autism. We're not exactly sure what George had by today's standards, but he was definitely special needs. And this book kind of highlights that, like Jane Austen's relationship with George and her entire family. And so I love this as like a young perspective of Jane Austen. She's only 20 in this book, and it dovetails really nicely with Lucy Worsley's book, Jane Austen at Home, and you just kind of feel like Jane Austen is a real person in this book. Loved it, and just loved the whole mystery, which was pretty good too, and her relationship with her family in this book. Such a great new series, and I can't wait for the next one. And finally, the last book or adaptation that I'd like to read this year for Jane Austen July is Miss Austen by Jill Hornby. This one has been on my TBR for many Jane Austen Julys. I just have not gotten around to it yet. She's already come out with like another one, Godmersham Park, which I'd like to read as well. But I thought I'd start with her first novel, Miss Austen. This one is about Jane Austen's sister, Cassandra. So Jane Austen died in her 40s, her early 40s, but Cassandra outlived her by like 20, 30 years. And so this book is supposed to be like Cassandra in her 60s, revisiting her memories of Jane Austen. And it is true that Cassandra destroyed a lot of Jane Austen's letters, and historians do not know why. So this is a fictional account of like why Cassandra destroyed Jane Austen's personal letters. Maybe there was something in Jane Austen's personal life that she did not want revealed to the reading public. Maybe there was something in Cassandra's life that she did not want revealed. We'll never know, but I've heard great things about this book and I'm really excited to read it. Challenge number 5 is to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. Jane Austen lived from the years 1775 to 1817. So again, a pretty good chunk of history there during the revolutions, during the Napoleonic Wars. And one of her female contemporaries was Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women. This is considered one of the first feminist essays in literature and history, you know, long before Virginia Woolf's time. In this book, Mary Wollstonecraft is really arguing for female education, and this is a topic I am hugely passionate about even today. She is arguing to the intelligentsia of the time that, look, in order to have a well-informed public and a society that can move forward and progress, women also need to be educated, not just men. I mean, how do we expect children to learn unless they learn from their mothers who are educated? How do we expect men to have good companions unless their wives are educated, or fathers to have good daughters unless their children are educated? And this is a topic that I'm very passionate about even today. It fascinates me that girls are not entitled to quality education in certain parts of the world. Not surprisingly, these are some of the most volatile parts of the world, and I'm a big believer in that. Like, you would not have things like terrorism if more girls were educated. But that being said, I've just always been fascinated about this essay. I've always wanted to read it, and I'm really excited to have this book and perhaps get to it this Jane Austen July. If you're not quite ready to go down the feminist rabbit hole, I do recommend this book, Frankenstein, by Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, Mary Shelley. Frankenstein is an excellent read. It's based on the Prometheus myth, and it's such a well-written book. I highly recommend it. If you're looking for a good edition, here is my version of Frankenstein, you know, with the green end papers. Highly recommend it. Love this book as well. Challenge number 6 is to watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen novel. Of course, my favorites are Pride and Prejudice, both versions, the Colin Firth version and the Keira Knightley version. I've also talked extensively about the Emma miniseries, which came out about, I don't know, I want to say 10 years ago. Love that one as well. And then I think I'll probably stick to Sandition this year. Again, I want to do this like Sandition project and read the unpublished manuscript and then go back and see how it was adapted to the screen by modern screenwriters and actors and producers and directors. I think that'll be a lot of fun to compare the two. And challenge number 7 is to watch a modern screen adaptation. And I would say the classic choice would be Clueless, which is based on Emma. And I also really love Lost in Austen, which I've talked about before. And then one of my personal favorites is, of course, Bridget Jones's Diary with Renee Zellweger and Colin Firth and Hugh Grant, which is based on Pride and Prejudice. I have recently read Bridget Jones's Diary as well. It's a lot different than the movie. I love the movie, but I also really, really love the book. Here is my version of Bridget Jones's Diary. I found this fabric with like the lips and I immediately thought of Bridget Jones. And then it does have more of these like teal end papers. Love this book, love the movie, and all things Bridget Jones. Thank you everyone for joining me for my recommendations and TBR for this year's Jane Austen July. Why do I love Jane Austen? Let me count the reasons. She was just ahead of her time. I mean, she really talked about all these themes that are still relevant today, like relationships and society and people and hypocrisy, and most importantly, female empowerment and female independence, which so many modern readers like myself connect to. Love her, love these books, and I love all the multiple interpretations and the adaptations of Jane Austen's works. Thank you everyone for joining me and have a great day.